Hey Rip City, this is Anthony Simons, and it's time to open the briefcase with Casey Holdahl.
Greetings, Spurs fans, and welcome to The Briefcase, presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Episode 117 of The Briefcase, only the second edition of The Briefcase, sponsored by our friends at Spirit Mountain Casino. But on this edition, we will discuss the Trailblazers getting a victory in New Orleans versus a bruised and battered Pelicans squad, thanks in part to yet another ridiculous fourth quarter effort from Dalano Banton. We'll also discuss if Chauncey Billups has created or invented the NBA closer by inserting Dalano Banton into the last couple games only in the fourth quarter and having great results. Tom Haberstroh wrote a really interesting article about that. We'll talk about that as well. The return of Shaedon Sharpe is very close. I imagine that he is going to be back in the lineup, available to play sometime here in the next couple days, maybe up to and including as soon as Thursday night's game versus the Spurs. Matisse Thybulle, I think, is also nearing a return as well, so we'll talk about that and what that means for the Trailblazers. And we'll hear from another Blazer who did just return, Robert Williams III, not Bob Williams III, by the way, too, as he discusses returning to the Trailblazers, what he's missed, his hopes and goals for the season, something that made him laugh recently, and where he gets all those hats on this edition of The Briefcase, presented by our friends at Spirit Mountain Casino. Well, the Portland Trailblazers getting their third victory of the season and their second road victory of the season Monday night versus the Pelicans, 118-100 at Smoothie King Arena for the second straight game. Dalano Banton sat for three quarters, checked into the game in the fourth quarter, and then proceeded to dominate the run of play once again, just like he did a few nights prior to that in Phoenix. Trailblazers weren't able to get the win in Phoenix. This time they were able to get the victory in New Orleans. The Trailblazers did find themselves down by as many as 14 points versus the Pelicans, which was a little concerning considering how many players the Pelicans were missing. I believe they had 6 players who were out. I think 3 of the players that started at least the first game versus the Trailblazers in Portland that they ended up winning by 2 didn't play in the game on Monday night. And, that's kind of not an uncommon thing. As Chauncey Billups talked about before the game, a lot of times when you have a lot of players who are out due to injuries, the guys behind them who are also NBA players do tend to step up and play better than you're accustomed to seeing them play. But the Trailblazers, it felt like throughout the entire second half, I really got the sense they were going to win that game. And as soon as Dalano Banton came out in the fourth quarter, you definitely knew they were going to win that game. They did have a great defensive effort from the second unit. And, the second unit, Chauncey kind of singled them out for some issues that they had versus the versus the Suns a few nights prior to that. They come out versus the Pelicans, had a much better performance. But even so, the Pelicans did take a 7-point lead into the intermission, but that would shrink to 3 by the end of the third quarter. And at that point, that's when the game got turned over to Dalano Banton over the next 12 minutes of the game. So the entirety of the fourth quarter, Dalano goes out and, again, dominates the run of play. Like, not even just like, he had a good game, he was playing well. He went out there and absolutely ran the show. 20 points, the most a Trailblazer has ever scored in 12 minutes or less in entire franchise history. Dalano Banton, fourth quarter versus the Pelicans, set that record. Dalano would end up posting 20 points on 8 of 9 shooting from the field, 2 of 3 shooting from 3, and 2 of 2 shooting from the line, to go with 2 rebounds, 2 steals, and an assist. And again, in 12 minutes, just playing in the fourth quarter for Dalano Banton yet again. And that really seems to be working for the Trailblazers. I think they were going to win that game regardless. They had already, particularly in that second half, had started to kind of outleg and I think outrun the Pelicans who, again, when you're down to that many players, it's going to be difficult to keep up the same level of energy as they had in the first half. But still, when you have a guy like Dalano Banton who can come in and really change the complexion of the game as he's done recently, whether you're up or down, you might as well get him in those games because he's been doing a really good job in those fourth quarters. As I mentioned, that's the most points a Trailblazer has ever scored in 12 minutes or left. Also, the second most points any NBA player has scored in the fourth quarter this season. And again, Dalano getting to the rim, I asked him about, after the game, I was like, you seems like you're getting into the paint, being able to finish really easily. And, Dalano went straight to, he's like, well, DeAndre sent me good screen, so that's getting me open. It seems like it's really effortless for him right now. And that was the case even versus the Suns. It's not effortless. It's difficult. Everything that happens on the NBA court is very difficult. But at least in terms of like the way it looked, particularly for a guy coming in cold, having not played for the first 3 quarters, it has looked really really smooth for Dalano Banton, and the Blazers maybe kind of finding a little something there. I think we saw Dalano after the trade last season to come to Portland, given a little bit more than I think people assumed he might have. He didn't really get much of an opportunity with the Celtics, which they end up winning the championship, so can't fault him for that. But the way that Dalano has played since he's gotten to Portland, it's kind of been up and down sometimes, but I would say generally definitely looks to me like a player who has more to offer than he's been able to show so far in the NBA, and he's really been doing that the last couple nights in Phoenix and New Orleans, and probably for the duration of this trip as well. While Dalano gets the headlines, and deservedly so, a really good team effort from the Trailblazers versus the Pelicans. Anthony Simons went 10 of 17 from the field for 24 points, 4 assists, a steal, and a rebound in 34 minutes. DeAndre Ayton with another double-double, 19 points, 13 rebounds, while also getting 2 assists, a block, and a steal in 31 minutes. Jeremy Grant finished with 16 points, 4 assists. Toumani Camara had 16 points and 4 assists as well, though he also added 6 rebounds, a steal, and a block in 36 minutes. Everyone played pretty well versus the Pelicans, I would say. And again, to start out, they did get down early. You kind of take that punch and then see if you can respond. The Blazers were able to do that. Granted, you'd probably rather not get down early, but it's almost just as good to see the team get down and then respond well than to have them just come out and blow the Pelicans out, which, they ended up doing by the end of the game. You winning by 18 points, when we were down 3 going into the fourth quarter. Again, it is pretty impressive anyways, and really speaks to how well Dalano Banton is playing in those fourth quarters. Brandon Ingram led the Pelicans with 27 points in 33 minutes. But, after the first half, he was really kind of a non-factor. And that was kind of one of the things that Chauncey talked about with that second unit. He felt like came in and did a really good job of defending Brandon Ingram. It's great to see the team be able to hold him in check. And just really nice to get that road victory. So now the Trailblazers have bested the Pelicans 2 times in the last 3 meetings, all 3 of those meetings in the first 2 weeks of the season. They'll play the Pelicans again, I think, in January, but as of right now, if nothing else, they'll split the season series, potentially possible that they end up winning that season series, which, for a Trailblazers team that I think that people don't have a whole lot of expectations for this season, even against shorthanded teams, it's nice to see them come out and play the way they want to play and establish an identity, which they have started to do defensively. One of the best teams statistically so far in the NBA this season in terms of paint defense. That's something that Chauncey Billups has talked about wanting to do for a while, is set a culture that really puts defense first. And I really think we're starting to see that from this team, and hopefully we'll be able to see it in these last 2 games on this trip versus San Antonio and Minnesota. And speaking of Dalano Banton, Tom Haberstroh, who is our stats insider for the broadcast, also has a website, Tom the Finder, great NBA stuff. Go ahead and subscribe to Tom's website if you don't already. Wrote a really interesting piece about the notion of being a closer in the NBA. They have closers, obviously, in baseball. You bring in a pitcher, usually sometime in the 9th inning, and you close the game out, and saves have become a stat because more teams started using the notion of like, hey, we got a guy, we're going to pitch him 8 innings, but we want to close this thing out, make sure we're not leaving anything to chance, or at least as much chance as we possibly can. Let's get a guy in there, throw some smoke for 3 batters and see if we can get out of this thing. And so the notion being that Chauncey Billups is kind of maybe bringing that idea to the NBA by having Dalano Banton not playing in the first 3 quarters and then getting into the game in the fourth quarter and really kind of having fresh legs and again, changing the speed of the game, changing the dynamics of the game, and having success doing that. And so I'm actually just going to go ahead and read some of the stuff that Tom wrote here. I should also mention, too, that Dalano Banton outscored the Pelicans on his own in that game. 20 points for Dalano Banton in the fourth quarter, 18 points for the Pelicans in the fourth quarter. When one guy in your team outscores the entirety of the other team, that's usually a pretty good thing. A very, again, I keep saying dynamic because it is dynamic. Like, that's something that you don't necessarily see very often. And it's almost like kind of the Suns and the Pelicans weren't necessarily prepared for like that level of energy or just that kind of vibe shift, if you will, by having Dalano in there. So, Tom was writing here. I'm just going to read some of this to you. Again, Tom the Finder, subscribe if you haven't already. The Blazers were able to compete a 22-point fourth quarter comeback. This is versus the Suns. But Banton somehow made it a 2-point game with a minute left. He was on the verge of getting the Blazers that win, even though they ended up losing that game by 5, but definitely had a chance in that game almost entirely due to Dalano Banton. Then 2 nights later, Billups pressed the Banton button again, the 3rd time in 4 nights. Think about this. After Banton led the charge against the Sun, Billups didn't go to Banton early. He waited and And in the fourth quarter, down 3, it was time. Billups finally put the ball in Banton's hand, summing him in for defensively to Monty Kamara. The Pelicans couldn't stop the guy in their own building. Banton outscored New Orleans by himself 20 to 18 the rest of the way. Portland won by 18. Banton finally closed the door, and the Blazers came away with a resounding win. And like Tom said on the broadcast, he can't recall seeing anything like this in the last 3 games. Banton has exclusively played in the fourth quarter, and he's scored 33 points in 33 minutes, shooting 16 of 19 from the floor and 4 of 9 from 3. He's tallied 4 steals and 2 blocks. That's another thing, too, about Dalano in the fourth quarter. He's playing great defense as well, and a guy who has the size and the length that Dalano has at that guard position definitely gives you a different look defensively than a guy like Anthony Simons or Scoot Henderson does at this point in time, at least. And in those 33 minutes of Banton ball, Tom wraps up here. Here's the scoreboard. Blazers 98, opponents 54. So in the 33 minutes that Dalano Banton has played in the fourth quarter over the last 3 games, the Blazers have outscored their opponents 98 to 54. 44 points better than their opponents, largely in part to the way that Dalano Banton has been playing. And so that does open up the notion that, like, is this a thing? Can you be a closer in the NBA? And usually, the kind of the standard understanding of playing in the NBA, and you hear this from players a lot, is the exact opposite, which is that if you're not coming into the game regularly, if you're not getting up to the speed of the game during the game, that it's hard to come in and just have an impact on the game. A lot of guys will talk about that when, they're starters and then maybe they start coming off the bench, that transition of like, boy, it's hard for me to kind of get into the flow of the game, get into the rhythm of the game when I'm coming off the bench. And, I'm not saying there's not something to that. It has always struck me as a little bit of a cop-out, it seems to me a little bit. Like, I mean, the idea is that, when your number is called, you got to be ready to go and give the same effort starting, coming off the bench, if you've played 20 minutes or you've played no minutes. And that's something that Delano's talked a lot about, is the idea of staying ready. And the Blazers, they have these games called stay ready games where guys who are kind of either not in the rotation or on the fringes of the rotation, they'll get together and they'll play, full runs just to kind of stay sharp. So when their number is called at some point in time, they feel like they're ready and they feel like they're not having to kind of get up to speed, or they haven't played ball consistently at that point. And I think, Dalano has shown that like that really works for Portland. And, I'm curious to see if maybe other teams might try that, and if this is going to be something they do with Dalano all season long. And, I'm sure from Delano's perspective, he probably really likes that, he being able to have an effect on the game. He probably also thinks like, hey, maybe I could do this earlier in the game as well. I mean, guys always want to play more minutes than they're getting. So like, I could see that too. But I think it's really interesting. I don't even know if I would call it an experiment, because I don't know if Chauncey is doing it kind of explicitly at this point. I would imagine after having success with it a couple of times now that he probably will. And I'm curious to see if maybe other teams might go that route, because again, like just from like a logical perspective, it makes sense. Like you're going up against a bunch of other players who have been playing significant minutes in that game. They're tired. They're used to kind of what the flow of the game is at that point in time. And if someone comes in with fresh legs and also changes the way that the game is kind of moving back and forth, like there's obviously seemingly a real advantage to that. And so I'm curious to see if maybe that will be how they decide to use Dalano this season, or maybe other players this season. And I'm also curious to see if maybe other teams might be like, you know what, like maybe we'll try that as well. It probably wouldn't work every single game, but again, if you feel like you're struggling, a lot of times they'll just do like full line changes where like they'll bring in the entire bench. Maybe you just kind of bring in 1 or 2 players and see if you can really change the way that you're playing in that game, and again change the rhythm of the game, change the flow of the game. And I feel like that's really what Delano's done in his past 2 games versus the Suns and the Pelicans. And I'm curious to see if more teams are going to start doing it, and if the Blazers are going to continue to do it as well. So, another storyline for Portland this season that I think is kind of low-key interesting to just pay attention to. What are some of the things that they're maybe experimenting with? And that was something that, I had heard from the team this season as well, particularly in regards to the remix, is that they're going to try to do some things with the remix this year where they're going to maybe experiment a bit and try some non-traditional ways to approach the game, to see if maybe there's things that they can do in the G League that they might be able to port over to the NBA. And, obviously the G League season hasn't started yet, so I wouldn't say this is necessarily one of those things. But just in terms of the notion of like, hey, we're gonna try some different things here. We're gonna mix it up a little bit. we've got some latitude this season to maybe try to play a different way and see if maybe some of the things we think might work in theory might actually work in practice on the court. So I think this might be one of those things, and I would say, at least initially, it's worked really well. One thing that could potentially change how many minutes Dalano Banton and a few other players are getting as well is the return of Shaedon Sharpe. Hasn't been announced just yet. They haven't released his injury status for Thursday's game versus the Spurs, but I imagine that he is probably going to be upgraded, if not to doubtful, then to questionable. It goes out, doubtful, questionable, available play. And I think Shaedon's pretty close. It looks to me, it sounds to me that Shaedon will be returning to the lineup here sometime on this trip, or if not on this trip, then very soon afterwards. Even if he doesn't end up getting upgraded, the team is very optimistic about what they've been seeing out of Shaedon in practices. I think he's probably played in some of those stay-ready games as well. And my understanding is that everyone feels really confident about kind of where he's at in terms of that rehabilitation of that shoulder injury. And my expectation is that it's going to be sooner rather than later that Shaedon Sharpe's going to return to the court. Just to remind you guys, a small posterior labral tear in his left shoulder that happened during training camp. Hasn't played, obviously, the season. Team said 4 to 6 weeks initially after the injury. Where I think we're into the 5-week generally area at this point in time. And again, everything I'm hearing is that Shaedon is just about ready to go. I know that he feels very comfortable. He is ready to get back out there. I think the team probably wanted to see him in a couple practices, see how he responds to having increased load and particularly increased contact. With that shoulder injury, it's basically, I don't think it really affects him. It's not in his shooting hand or shooting arm either. But I think just seeing how he takes contact is probably what the team is the most paying attention to right now in terms of Shaedon's rehabilitation. But long story long, I would expect at this point in time that Shaedon will probably be upgraded for the game versus the Spurs, if not for the game versus the Timberwolves. And as I mentioned with Robert Williams returning, I'd be a little surprised if he was playing in back-to-back games. So if he plays in one, I imagine he maybe won't play in the other, just because you don't want to put a guy in a situation where, you're throwing a bunch of minutes at him. And that's not even about the injury. That's more just about kind of being in game shape and fitness. Though I will say, Shaedon's a young man. If he's healthy, if he's ready to go, if they feel like he's able to come out and if he's ready, I think it's a possibility that he maybe plays in both. I feel like whenever you're returning from injury and you haven't been out there for a while, playing in back-to-back seems somewhat unlikely to me, but, we'll see. But everything I can tell, what I've been hearing, what I've been seeing is that Shaedon is going to be back very soon, and that's a really good thing. We're very close to this team being as healthy as they've been in a season. I am also expecting that Matisse Thybulle is probably going to be back here sometime soon as well. Maybe not as soon as Shaedon, but I would say in the next week, 10 days, if nothing else. He had a procedure to reduce swelling on his right knee on October 17th, at which point in time the team said he would be out for 3 to 4 weeks. And we're right about at that 3-week mark right now. So I do think he's probably increasing the amount that he's practicing, increasing the load that he is enduring. And I would imagine, again, that he will probably be available here sometime in the next week to 10 days, which, at that point in time, the Blazers will, I should probably knock on wood right now, have a clean injury report, which I don't know when the last time that's happened for Portland, but it's been some time, which is a good problem to have. Chauncey's going to have to probably figure out carving out some of the minutes here. When Shaedon returns, obviously incredibly important to this team's future. If Shaedon hadn't gotten injured prior to the season, I imagine he probably would have started the season starting alongside Anthony Simons. I imagine he's probably going to come off the bench at least for a while. At some point in time, though, you would imagine they'll probably want to get Shaedon in that starting line, at least if he performs well. And so what does that mean for Tumani? What does that mean for Denny? What does it mean for guys like Chris and Rian, who have both played really well in reserve roles? What does it mean for Dalano? it's a good problem to have. But again, I think those are things that Chauncey's going to have to work through. And, it's a problem he hasn't had on this team in some time. And hopefully it's a problem that continues, because you would hate for guys to get back out there, then have a rash of injuries, and then you're back to the place we were at before, which is where you're cobbling together lineups on a night-to-night basis. The Blazers have had the same starting lineup in all their games so far this season, which, again, I don't know when the last time that happened to start a season for Portland. I don't think we got 7 or 8 games into last season before they had to start switching up the lineups due to injuries there as well. So, again, it's close. I think maybe even by time you listen/watch this version of the briefcase presented by our friends at Spirit Mountain Casino, that we'll have a little more understanding about what Shaedon's availability, and maybe even Matisse's availability as well. So, definitely good news, definitely something to pay attention to. And now it becomes, one, how long does it take for these guys to kind of reintegrate back into the lineup, to get their fitness up? Particularly when you miss training camp as well, like that probably takes you maybe a little bit longer to get back into the swing of things than if you went through training camp and then went out sometime during the season. But either way, Blazers getting healthier, and that's really a good thing. So, just yet another storyline to pay attention to as we finish up this road trip and get back to Portland for 4 games at home straight. That they're going to be in a situation, or at least it seems like they're going to be in a situation, or at least have the possibility. Again, I'm knocking on wood here. I don't want to jinx anything. To have a team that is fully healthy and available by the time we get back to Portland, I would say is maybe in the air, and I would say definitely sometime on this upcoming homestand. Again, if nothing happens in between, if there's no setbacks, if no one gets injured on this road trip, I fully expect that at some point in time in the very near future, again, probably by the time we get back to Portland, or at least sometime in that stretch when we're back there for 4 games, that the entire team will be available, which is a very good thing. But before heading back home, the Trailblazers do have 2 more games, a back-to-back, Spurs on Thursday, Timberwolves on Friday. And one thing I would say, if you don't have Friday plans yet, perhaps go down to Spirit Mountain, watch the Blazer game versus the Timberwolves, and check out Collective Soul, which will be live at Spirit Mountain Casino on November 8th. That's this Friday at 8 p.m. Trailblazers game starts, I think, at 6, so you can watch the Blazers and then roll straight into the venue to watch Collective Soul at 8 o'clock. With its chart-topping hits like Shine and December, you won't want to miss out on this legendary performance. There are still a few tickets available, so call up the Spirit Mountain box office to reserve your seats now. I also posted some links in the post on Blazers.com for the Spirit Mountain box office, so you can click there to get to the Spirit Mountain box office as well, or just call up Spirit Mountain. Tell me you want to see Collective Soul, November 8th. Tickets still available. So as I mentioned, head to Spirit Mountain Friday afternoon, maybe sit down at the tables, maybe take a few spins on an old slot machine, watch the Blazers take on the Timberwolves, and then check out Collective Soul, 8 p.m. start time. Get your tickets, Spirit Mountain Box Office Casino. Spirit Mountain, elevate your game. And speaking of elevating your game and wagering, Portland Trail Blazers are 5-2-1 versus the spread this season. After covering versus the Pelicans, they were 1-point underdogs versus the Pelicans and ended up winning that game by 18. Blazers have opened as 4.5-point underdogs versus the Spurs for Thursday's game as well. Portland doing a very good job versus the spread. Seems like they're a team that is a little undervalued right now, I would say. I think the expectation is that this is a rebuilding year for Portland, and that's true. But particularly early on the season, they're going to put their best foot forward. They're getting healthier, and they're coming out and trying to win games. Like they're not looking at the games and thinking to yourselves like, well, we don't want to win too many. We got to consider, what the draft's going to be like. They're going out here trying to win these games and being competitive while doing it, and I think that's a great thing, and which is why not only are they covering in wins, but I feel like the Blazers have some pretty good backdoor coverability as well these days. So 5-2-1 versus the spread, not entirely surprising to me, because again, I think that they're probably a little bit undervalued in terms of kind of the perception of the Blazers versus where they're actually at right now. So that's another thing you do at Spirit Mountain as well, is place some wagers on some of your favorite sports betting. Also, by the way, too, in casinos in Oregon is the only place you can bet on college sports as well. So I know you can do that at Spirit Mountain Casino. So if you're also looking to maybe put in some college football bets as that season really starts to heat up as we get closer to bowl season, Spirit Mountain's a great place to do that as well. So Trailblazers, Spirit Mountain, check it out. And finally, before we wrap up this edition of The Briefcase, presented by our friends at Spirit Mountain Casino, Finally got a chance to talk to Robert Williams III about his rehabilitation, what he's missed about not being able to play, the mental and physical hurdles of returning from a long-term injury, the center rotation in Portland and his relationship with Donovan Clingan, things that make him laugh from time to time, and where he gets his collection of stocking caps. Love talking to Rob. He's such a great dude. I'm so happy he's back, and I'm really excited, both in terms of Rob just personally being able to get back out there. He talks a lot about kind of, being joyful and basketball being something that brings him a lot of joy. And when you're not able to do that, how do you replace that? It's great for Rob personally. I think it's great for the Blazers as well. Obviously, getting another player of Rob's caliber out there. Portland center rotation, I think, we're seeing one of the best in the NBA. And with the return of Robert Williams, probably the best center rotation in the NBA. And it'll be really interesting to see how they're able to play all those guys together. Again, another thing that Chauncey Billups is going to have to figure out, a great problem to have. So let's go ahead and hear from Robert Williams after practice in San Antonio on Wednesday. All right, here with Rob Williams III. First off, I guess real quick too, since it's been a minute, how do you like to be addressed? You Rob Williams III, Rob Will III? Like, what's your preferred nomenclature?
As long as it's actually my name or something related to my name, I'm cool with it. I don't like the name Bob, but one of my old GMs, Danny Ainge, used to call me Bob whenever I was unavailable. So I accept the Bob when I'm hurt, but I'm back now, you feel me?
So now
Rob, anything like that is cool for sure.
The idea that Bob and Robert, I feel like those things too, those names never make any sense to me. Like, why is Dick short for Richard? Like, things like that, they don't make any sense.
Facts. I never knew Bob was short for Robert until...
I didn't really either until people say it.
Yeah, until
what?
Danny Ainge started calling me Bob one day, and I was like, man, I don't like that name. He was like, whenever you hurt, I'm going to call you Bob. Whenever you playing, your name could be Rob. So I accepted that for sure.
Absolutely. So how are you feeling, Rob? And just both physically and mentally, after having basically a year having to sit out, how are you feeling as you're coming back and getting your chance to return now?
Yeah, physically I feel way, way better, man. Like you said, whole 365 days plus. Finally got to dress out with the guys last game. And mentally, man, I'm just trying to, figure out where I can help our team, figure out how to help our team on the court and off the court, and vocally. Like I said, we got young guys, and just, inserting my way back into the game, man, playing the thing I love to play.
Absolutely. How difficult was that for you to be out for that long? And I know that, you've had some injuries before, but, like, to have to go a whole season, particularly when you're in a new situation, too, I imagine that makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, it was kind of right after the trade, so it was tough, but I'm not a guy that gets too down. I recognize situations, try to make the most out of situations. So when I was down, I was able to capitalize on a lot of things to help my body and a lot of things in life, mentally, family, all that stuff. And I just look at it as a chance, God gave me to, get myself right, and thankfully he let me be back on the court.
Absolutely. What's maybe some of the things you missed the most about not being able to play?
Really just the joy it brought me, you know what I'm saying? The joy to fight with my teammates, I missed the shit talking. It was just everything about it, My son was watching the game the other night. He called me after, told me, Daddy, I see you on TV. So those are little things I miss. But most of all, just my joy, man, my happiness from playing the game. Ready to get that back.
Where do you think that comes from? Because you talk about playing the game, and I know that that's part of it, but, like, you just seem like a very joyful person, and people are drawn to you. Like, you can tell that, like, you have the kind of personality and the mentality that I think people are, again, they're drawn to it. And I'm wondering if you recognize that, and where do you think that might come from?
Yeah, I think that just come from, having hardships in life. Everybody goes through a lot. You never know what a person is going through. And, since I was younger, I kind of been like that beam of light to help raise people's spirits, even though I might be going through stuff. And you learn, we got a lot that we want in this life, with this job. I can't be stressed. I'm too blessed to be stressed. And I did a lot of stuff that I wanted to do in my life already. So I feel like my objective is putting smiles on other people's faces. And that's where I gain my energy, my confidence from.
Absolutely. You talked about kind of figuring out ways to help the team both on and off the court. Could you expand on that a little bit? Kind of where have you landed on where are those areas, or what are those things do you feel like you could really provide?
Yeah, for sure. On the court, physicality, just being vocal, being a leader and making more people step up in that leadership role, which they can. And that goes to off the court, just communication. Communication isn't just on the court, just getting a team together more off the court, doing stuff with each other, getting comfortable with each other, getting comfortable enough to have those uncomfortable conversations and push us through that wall.
I've done this for a while, and I've always noticed that kind of one of the things about when you're injured or not able to play is that I think sometimes it's hard to maybe give advice when you're not able to play because it just feels a little weird. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious now that you are able to play, like if you feel like you can kind of maybe step in a little bit more, because when you're not playing, it's a show me league. Like if you're not performing, like guys look at you and are like, well, I appreciate it, but also like you're not out there, you know?
Yeah, it's one of those things you got to learn how to like tap the gas a little bit, when the full throttle, when the let back. So it's kind of something I've been doing last year and this year when I wasn't playing. Everybody goes through phases, so I might talk to the guys during the game, but if I see someone has a little attitude or something, or the team is going through a rough patch, I might calm down a little bit, change up the tempo of the conversation. Not necessarily bickering and arguing, but more coaching up, bringing them up like this. So you just got to look at the situation.
From a play perspective too, like what are some of the things that you feel like you can provide? Because obviously, a great defensive player, a guy who brings a level of athleticism and physicality that I think probably no one else on the team at that position brings at this point. So, like, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you would like yourself to fit into the lineup.
Yeah, like you said, man, just first and foremost for me, is being a defensive anchor. That's why I hang my hat at. But bringing the physicality, offense and defense, being the same explosive person, rolling hard. My role is creating shots for other players. And on to the second thing, that's the biggest thing, is like creating easy baskets, easy shots for our scorers. We want those guys to get easy layups. That way, when it's time to get the tough ones, they got the energy to do it.
Absolutely. And with the way you play too, like, is there any mental hurdle after an injury to come back and play the way that you play? Because you were an athletic guy, like you're throwing your body around. Like, is there a mental piece of that you have to get over, or do you just get back out there on the court and that's that?
I feel like I got over that like maybe 2.5 months ago when I first played.
Okay.
The first game of 5-on-5, it was scary. I didn't want to get bumped. I didn't want to really jump or go for anything. But like the first play of the game, Scoot threw me like a half-court lob, bro. And once that happened, I was like, all right, yeah, I'm good.
That's great. Yeah, and then maybe that's all it takes is just to see it a couple times and be like, yeah, no, it's cool. It's good.
Yeah, facts. So it's like riding a bike. My agent and my pops were texting me, asking me was I nervous. I was just telling them I'm ready to just dunk and breathe just one time, like just exhale, but it's simple, man.
Absolutely. Can you talk about the center rotation on this team a little bit? Like some real dynamic players. I think all three of you, DeAndre and Donovan, I think you all kind of bring something different, but at an elite level as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The center rotation is, as you see, is great right now. You know what I'm saying? And we got to be patient and we got to realize what matchups work best for, each person, each center. Some nights I might not play. Some nights, some people may get less minutes throughout the whole team. So that's a part of the sacrifice for the team, though, and that's a part of wanting to win more than anything.
And that's something I've heard a lot, too, is that you've been a real mentor for Donovan. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that relationship a little bit, because even though you haven't played, I've heard that from multiple people, that how important that you've been just for his early days.
Yeah, when you first come into the league, man, it's tough. Like, sometimes you don't even want to talk. Like, you scared to ask vet stuff. Yeah. You don't want to mess up. You want to try your hardest. But sometimes you need a vet telling you that it's all right, showing you the ropes the right way. I had Marcus Morris, Al Horford, had Kyrie, had a lot of vets help me, Marcus Smart, and they taught me the right way. I just want to help him be the best player that he can be, which is coming along pretty good.
Yeah, he walks in as soon as we're talking about him. So no, that's fine. Yeah, no, we were just it was good timing. We were actually.
What up, my dog?
The dog, Brooke loves that stuff. I guess what's your hope for this team going forward? I know that people kind of look at the years kind of transitionally a little bit, so I'm curious, from your perspective, like what would you like to see, or what are some of your hopes and goals?
To be honest, is what my hopes and goals. Honestly, obviously playoffs, but it's what I've been seeing the past couple of games. Last year we had fight, but sometimes when we got down, we would lay down. You know what I'm saying? And this year, even in the games where we got down big by a big deficit, we didn't lay down. Even who did we just lose to? I think the Clippers. We lost to the Clippers. I seen fight with the Thunder. I seen fight. So that's the biggest thing, when we hit that wall, which we'll hit a wall a bunch of times this year. We got to be able to bounce back and fight.
Absolutely. What's it been like for you off the court? I know I always try to ask you kind of an off-the-court question. I asked you at Media Day, like, when was the last time you laughed about something or something funny your family did? Like, what's the last thing that made you laugh, actually?
Last thing that made me laugh, Last game we just played in New Orleans. It was kind of late. The game finished at like 10:30. I called my son, and he was trying to stay up for the game, but he was just talking delirious on the phone. Like, I don't know what he was saying. He was naming what he had for lunch. He was just so delirious. I'm like, bro, just go to sleep. Just go to sleep.
I wanted to ask you too one more time. Where do you get your hats at? Because you're a big hat guy. You're always wearing a stocking cap, but you got kind of a big head and a lot of hair. So like, I imagine you can't just get a hat anywhere.
Yeah, for some reason, I say like the past 2 years, they started making all beanies like more flexible.
Yeah, okay.
It's like they're starting to make all of them more flexible. So I shop in Houston, Portland. I shop in Louisiana some. And most of the stores that I get beanies from, I just give them my number and tell them, whenever y'all get anything in, just let me know and ship them to me, man, for sure.
Rob, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, man. No problem. My dog.
Dude, great stuff there from Rob. I always enjoy talking to Rob. And one of the reasons I'm glad that Rob's out there, one, I think it's good for the team. One, I think it's great for Rob. But two, it just gives me more reason to talk to Robert Williams, which I think is great. He's always a guy who I really like getting his perspective on things. He's always great at kind of taking the temperature of the locker room and understanding where guys are coming from. You talk to Rob and you hear from other guys in the league too. Everyone loves Robert Williams. Like, he's such a popular player, a guy who players really look up to, particularly for a guy who's not necessarily a star level player, but has a lot of talent and just carries himself in a way that, as I mentioned, I think people are just kind of drawn to it a little bit. Like, people really respect Robert Williams, what he does both on and off the court, the mentality he brings, kind of what he does in a locker room as well, the levity that he brings, but also, like, as he talked about, like getting on guys and recognizing when someone is maybe, bringing energy that is counterproductive to what the team is trying to do. So really just a really great thing to get Rob back out there. It was such a bummer that he missed all of last season. Real bummer that he had to sit out for the entire year. As he mentioned, 365 days, I believe he was out. Rob back in the lineup now, was available, as I mentioned, for the game versus the Pelicans. Didn't end up playing in that game versus the Pelicans, which, not really surprising. In fact, I would have been a little surprised if Robert did play, just because, there's just a lot of different reasons, particularly when you're trying to work a guy back in. They hadn't had a whole lot of practice time. So Rob had been able to go through workouts, but I don't know that he had got to spend a whole lot of time practicing with the team. The fact that they're able to do that today in San Antonio, get that practice in, I imagine it's more likely that we'll see Rob get on the floor versus the Spurs than it was versus the Pelicans. And, hopefully, he's able to get out there and be successful. And just not even that, but just get through some games feeling healthy and confident and really kind of getting that confidence back up. And he talked about, like not necessarily worrying about those things. I thought it was a great story there about kind of catching a lob from Scoot and really feeling like, okay, like I'm back. But I imagine being on the floor in an NBA game probably does feel a little bit different. And, versus the Spurs team that obviously has Victor Wembanyama, a guy who you need to throw a lot of bodies at anyways. So I would almost be a little surprised if we didn't see Rob at some point in time in that game versus the Spurs. But again, Chauncey's got a lot of players now that he has at his disposal, a lot of guys with a lot of different skills that he can utilize now. And, figuring out kind of how that's going to work on a night-to-night basis is probably going to take a little bit of time. So either way, though, great to have Rob back. Great to hear his perspective, and really looking forward to what he can do for this team, both on and off the court. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Briefcase presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. Thank you so much for joining me, as always. As I mentioned, Trailblazers face the Spurs on Thursday, 5 p.m. start time on KATU 2.1 and 2.2 and Blazer Vision. Then finishing off the trip, second night of back-to-back versus the Timberwolves on Friday. That's a 6 p.m. start time on KATU 2.2 and Blazer Vision. And then back for 4 games in a row at Moda Center, starting with the Grizzlies, Sunday afternoon, 6 p.m., Blazer Vision, KATU 2.2. Thank you so much for joining me, as always, on this edition of The Briefcase presented by Spirit Mountain Casino. I will talk to you next week. Go Blazers.